there have been any number of advancements in U.S. interests in Africa, and a number of the large companies that you probably follow have increased their investments in the region. I think that investing in Africa can sometimes be somewhat daunting. It's a large continent, a complex continent, and hopefully in the remarks that I will share with you now, I can help to unpack it and make it a little bit more digestible. I think the first thing that I would say is that one must appreciate African business culture. And African business culture is very similar to Eastern business culture, although that was very much acknowledged when Americans first started doing business in Japan and in China. We recognized that there was a business culture, and people would walk around and learn how to properly present their business cards and so forth. There hasn't been any sort of widespread acknowledgement of an African business culture, but if you look at how Africans do business among one another, it's a clue as to how they would expect to do business with the global world as well. And that is that a lot of the time that's spent at the beginning of a conversation, at the beginning of a relationship, getting to know someone, which many Americans think to be a waste of time, where you just kind of, let's cut to the terms of the deal, that is a way in which Africans are doing due diligence. They are figuring out, is this someone that I can do business with? Asking about the family, asking about things outside of work, helps put things into context, and helps to unpack whether this is someone that I can trust. If challenges come up along the way, do we have a basis for resolving issues? So I would encourage you to be among the first to acknowledge this, that there is an African business culture. I'm sure there will be some consultants somewhere along the way who will earn lots of money trying to teach all of us these things, but you heard it here first, so you've got a head start. The second thing I would say is that African consumers have more money than you think. Looking at the GDP levels is certainly something that one must do to understand the relative wealth of African countries vis-a-vis one another and vis-a-vis the rest of the world. But I think that the cell phone, the explosion of the cell phone industry, what we always point to when we talk about successes in Africa, demonstrates that people have more money than you think they do. And so the projections for the penetration rates for cell phone usage in Africa couldn't have been any further off base. And now you have countries like South Africa where the cell phone penetration rate is 117%. So there are more cell phones than there are people in that country. And people find money for those things that are of value to them. Another example I'll give you is I founded a scholarship program in South Africa based on one that was, I know very well here in New York, the Student Sponsorship Partners here in New York. And in our first year, we interviewed a number of very poor families with children, very smart children, who were going to get scholarships to go to private school in South Africa. And we took our U.S. financial aid forms and we asked them to fill them out, mother's income, father's income, assets, and we reviewed them. And we decided in our own minds, we wanted every family to make some contribution to their children's education. And we decided in our own minds how much we thought each of these poor families could contribute to their children's education. But we decided not to tell them what we thought. We decided to first see what they had to say. And in that first class of 25 kids, to each single one, all 25 families offered significantly more than what we would have thought they could afford. And it's because this was something that they valued. When people have something that they value, they figure out how to make it happen. And the extended family plays a very important role in the notion of household income in Africa. So when we were looking at the mother and father's income, we didn't realize, they said the granny wants to contribute. It's been her dream that her grandson could go to one of these schools. The auntie wants to help. Sister just graduated from high school. She's going to get a job. I mean, the extended family creates much more household income than you might appreciate by looking at the per capita numbers. The third thing to unpack about Africa is that it can sometimes be daunting. We know in terms of the number of countries. There are those people who think that Africa is a country. There are those people who appreciate that it's 54 countries. And I would say that it's kind of neither. It's somewhere in between. You can really begin to think of the continent from a regional perspective. Swaziland and Lesotho, are within the country of South Africa. They're like small cities. They're small. They're 500,000 people. Is that really a country? I mean, it's part of South Africa from an economic standpoint, with all due respect to the king. I think that you can really start to think about Africa as the southern, eastern, western, and North Africa. And once you start to unpack it into those. These aren't my slides, but those was a useful map for me to use. But in any case, It's really a region. It's a really regional play. And so I think that that is a good way to think about the continent and to make it less daunting.